The night my mother told me to pack my things and leave the house I paid for. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She stood in the doorway, calmly explaining that my sister needed the space more than I did, then held out her hand for my keys like I was some tenant whose lease had expired. I hadn't even taken my coat off. But the real punch came later when I saw the photos online. My family smiling in my kitchen, celebrating their new home, acting like I'd never helped at all. And the moment I showed up uninvited, that's when everything snapped. Long before the night my mother tried to evict me from the house I bought. The signs were already there, etched into the rhythm of our family, in ways I didn't have the words for as a kid. Looking back, none of it was sudden. It was just the final step in a pattern that started the moment I was old enough to notice how attention moved in our home towards some people like sunlight and away from others like shadows. My name is Adrian Cole, the second-born son who arrived 2 years too late to matter. At least that's how it always felt. My older sister, Lena. He wasn't just the first child. She was the family project, the miracle, the center of gravity around which every plan, every decision, every mood in our house revolved. My mother, Rebecca, was the kind of woman who needed someone to shine through, someone to live out the story she'd built in her head about what her life could have been if she'd had the right opportunities. My sister made that fantasy easy. She was social, loud, dramatic, in a way my mother mistook for charisma. My father, Daniel, just went along with whatever kept the peace. He loved us, I think, but in a passive way, like admiration from a distance. He left the emotional heavy lifting to my mother, and she only ever wanted to hold one weight. Me, I was quiet, analytical. I asked too many questions that adults didn't want to answer. I noticed everything, even when they wished I wouldn't. And in a family like mine, noticing was a liability. When we were kids, Saturdays belonged to Lena. Gymnastics meets, performances, competitions, events with matching shirts printed with her name and number. My mom had a megaphone voice even without the actual megaphone, screaming herself hoarse for every flip, every attempt, every wobble. Afterward, there would be cupcakes, balloons, long speeches about how gifted she was and how she was destined for great things. I'd be the kid holding the camera no one thanked me for operating, the one cleaning up wrappers, collecting water bottles, and getting a distracted good job. Sweetie, when the adults ran out of compliments for my sister, when I brought home a certificate for the academic fair in 4th grade, my mom didn't even look up from her phone before saying, "That's wonderful. Honey, can you help me load Lena's equipment into the car?" My dad ruffled my hair like that was equal encouragement. Meanwhile, Lena stood on the driveway surrounded by gifts and praise like it was a national holiday created for her. Those small moments stack on a kid. At first, they feel like coincidences. Then they start to feel like evidence. The only place I ever felt truly seen was 2 blocks away, in a small brick house that smelled like lemon soap and tomatoes simmering on the stove. My grandparents, my dad's parents, Arthur and Miriam, were the kind of people who made you feel bigger without needing you to perform. My grandfather had a slow, steady way of talking, like every sentence mattered. He'd sit me at the kitchen table with his old newspapers and teach me about savings, interest, and why people invested. He'd say things like, "You think clearly, Adrian. Don't let them convince you that your quiet is a weakness." My grandmother taught me chess. She always played the black pieces. On purpose. "You learn more when you go second," she'd say. "You learn how people move before they even know what they're doing." When I beat her for the first time at 11, she smiled like I'd climbed Everest. "You're not invisible," she told me. "They just can't see past their favorite story. So write your own." Her voice would echo in my head years later, when I realized how right she was. By the time I hit middle school, the gap between how our parents treated me and Lena had become a routine. She was their future. I was the reliable one, the backup plan, the one they counted on to do chores, to solve logistical problems, to fix things they didn't want to deal with, but never the one they celebrated. Lena would crash the family car into a mailbox, and my mom would say, "It could have happened to anyone." I'd forget to take out the trash once, and suddenly, I never helped around the house. Lena got into a mediocre arts program in college, and my mother cried happy tears. I made honor roll, and she said, "That's nice. Can you help clean out the garage? Your sister needs space for her stuff." I didn't resent Lena. She wasn't cruel, just used to being the gravitational center. She floated through life believing people would always catch her, because they always had. She believed love was owed, not earned, and my parents reinforced that belief every chance they got. The first real sign of manipulation came when I was around 14. My mother needed money for some emergency repair they hadn't budgeted for. I had been saving birthday cash and money from small jobs, mowing lawns, tutoring, whatever I could do. "Sweetheart," she said one afternoon, stepping into my room without knocking, "your sister needs new equipment. Her coach says this is important for her future. Can we borrow some of your savings?" Borrow. A gentle word that suggested return. I didn't want to give it, but saying no felt like failing a test I didn't know I'd been taking. I handed it over, and she hugged me like I'd won some Nobel Prize for selflessness. She never paid me back. She never even mentioned it again. That became a pattern, not just for money, but for time, for emotional labor, for convenience. I was the steady one, the dependable one, the one she assumed would always bend because I always had. It took me years to realize that being the responsible child in a dysfunctional family is just code for the one we can exploit without pushback. Through high school, through college applications, through every milestone where I needed support, my mother's attention was elsewhere. When I got into a top finance program, she frowned like the acceptance letter was an inconvenience. "New York," she said. "Why so far? What about your father and me? What about your sister? You know she relies on us. Don't be selfish." That word again. Always the same accusation. Always the same emotional hook. My father would sigh, maybe put a hand on my shoulder. But he never contradicted her. He lived in a permanent truce with her moods. And I was collateral damage in that peace agreement. If it weren't for my grandparents, I don't think I would have ever applied. The day the letter came, my grandfather whispered, "Go. Build something yours. You don't owe them your potential." He and my grandmother died before they ever saw what I built with it. But they planted the seed. They're the reason I had the spine to leave and eventually. It's the spine to stand up to my family when they tried to rewrite the story without me. If part 2 of my life was defined by being overlooked, part 3 was about being used. Quietly at first, like a slow leak in a house wall, then all at once. When the foundation finally gave way. When I left for college in New York, I thought distance would shrink the dysfunction. I thought being a few hours away would give everyone space to grow up. Maybe even realize how unbalanced things had been. But if anything, the distance made my role in the family even clearer. I became the lifeline, the responsible one, the reliable one, the one they reached for whenever Lena stumbled, which was often. My mother would call with tearful updates: "Your sister's internship fell through," or "She's having trouble with tuition this semester," or "We're behind on bills again." "Sweetheart, I hate to ask, but, and every time, she said the same line, "You're doing so well, Adrian. You're the only one who can help." It was emotional manipulation dressed up like praise. And it worked. I'd send what I could from my part-time income and student savings. I convinced myself it was temporary. I convinced myself it was normal family stuff. I convinced myself I was choosing it. But looking back, I wasn't choosing anything. I was conditioned. When I graduated and accepted the analyst job in Manhattan, the pressure changed shape. My salary wasn't huge, entry-level finance never is, but to my parents, it might as well have been a lottery win. My mother's calls became more frequent, more urgent. We're paying for Lena's certification program. Could you spot us this month? The car needs repairs. Your father is drowning in side jobs. Your sister's moving again. Can you help with the deposit? Meanwhile, Lena posted photos of brunches, road trips, and concert tickets. Hashtag number grind set and number blessed. Like she was living the life of someone with actual stability. Every time I visited home, something felt off. My mom wasn't just stressed, she was frantic. My dad wasn't just tired, he was hollow. There were envelopes tucked under magazines, folded bills shoved between cookbooks. The air in the house always smelled faintly like panic. But they never said the word debt. Not once. It hovered in the room like a ghost they hoped I wouldn't notice. The real shift came about 2 years into my job. It started with my mother calling one Sunday, with a cheerful tone that immediately put me on guard. "So, sweetheart," she said, "your sister wants to start her own business." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "What business?" "Oh, you know, something creative. Something she's passionate about." She lowered her voice. "But she needs a little help to get started." "How much help?" There was a pause. "Just 15,000. To get the basics going. She has a vision." I laughed quiet, stunned. "Mom, I don't have that lying around." "But you're doing so well," she insisted. "You have that good job. You live in the city. You're single. You have no one to take care of. And your sister, well, she could really use this chance." It wasn't the amount of money that broke something in me. It was the list. You live in the city. You're single. You have no one. So your life is more available to sacrifice. They didn't see my independence as success. They saw it as vacancy space they could claim for themselves. That year, Lena moved back home temporarily. That temporary stay stretched into months. She bounced between gigs, dropped big dreams as fast as she picked them up, and my mother praised her resilience through it all. Meanwhile, I paid for repairs, medical bills, groceries, utilities, whatever crisis they presented as urgent. They always said thank you. But it was the kind of thank you give a stranger who holds the door. Polite, hollow, not quite real. And every month I helped, the expectation grew. It got to the point where my phone vibrating made my stomach drop. I always guessed who it was. I was almost always right. Then came the line, the boundary they crossed. So cleanly, I still remember exactly where I was standing when it happened. I was visiting for the weekend, sitting in the kitchen doing some work on my laptop, when my mother came in with 2 cups of coffee. She sat across from me with an oddly soft smile. "Adrian," she said gently, "your sister needs the spare room." I blinked. "For what?" "She needs space to focus, to rebuild. And since you're only here a few nights a month, it would make more sense for you to stay on the couch when you visit." My hands froze above the keyboard. "The couch," I repeated. "Well, yes. You don't need a whole room. You're a guest." A guest. In the house I'd been helping to sustain. In the family I was carrying financially. In the home I grew up in. I stared at her, trying to understand if she meant it literally or if she was trying to soften a growing imbalance. But she continued. "Chipper, Lena needs stability. You're already stable. This is her time." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't say anything at all. But something shifted in me, like a lens clicking into focus. For the first time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even surprised. I was awake. Awake to the role they'd built around me. Awake to how willingly I'd let them shape it. Awake to what I'd become to them. Not a son, not a brother, a resource, a faucet they could turn when they needed relief, a cushion to break every fall Lena took, an emergency fund disguised as a family member. And yet, even in that clarity, I stayed quiet. Not out of fear, not out of love, out of habit. Because when you grow up being the one who fills gaps, silence becomes your default language. I didn't know then that the silence was about to break, that the next chapter would push me further than I'd ever been pushed, that the family I'd been trying to hold together would be the ones to finally snap the strings. The night everything finally snapped didn't begin like a disaster. In fact, it began so quietly that, for a moment, I almost missed the part where my family crossed a line I couldn't ignore anymore. I'd driven out from Manhattan on a rainy Friday after work because my mother said she wanted me home for a family discussion. She added one of those guilt-laced lines she knew worked on me. It would really mean a lot. Adrian. I arrived soaked, tired, and still wearing my work clothes. I expected a serious conversation, money issues. Maybe something about my dad's health. Something real. Instead, I walked into the living room and found my mother, my father, and my sister already seated like a panel waiting for a presentation. Lena had this smug, practiced half-smile that immediately put me on alert. My mother didn't waste time. Adrian, she said, we've made a decision about the new house. The new house. The bungalow I had been quietly researching for weeks. The house I was planning to buy in my name to rescue them from the debt spiral they'd created. The house I'd told them might be a solution if we handled things responsibly. What decision, I asked, dropping my bag by the door. My mother clasped her hands together, performing calm. We think it makes the most sense if the house is considered ours as a family, not just yours. I blinked. It's my money, my mortgage. I'm trying to help you, not start a group project. Lena leaned forward. We talked. And honestly, it doesn't feel right for you to hold the paperwork over us. Mom said you agreed it should be a fresh start for everyone. I never said that, I replied. My mother sighed dramatically, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Sweetheart, don't make this difficult. You're hardly around. Lena will be helping us maintain things day to day. So it's only fair she's included on the deed. For a second, I truly believed I'd misheard her. Then I saw it. A folder on the coffee table. Printed documents. A blank deed transfer form. Sticky notes marking places for signatures. They hadn't asked for my help. They'd planned to take ownership of the house I hadn't even bought yet. My mother pushed the folder toward me. Just sign where we highlighted. We already talked to a friend at church who can notarize. The room didn't spin, it narrowed. My dad stared at his knees. Lena twisted a strand of her hair, acting bored but eager. My mother watched me like a general expecting obedience from a well-trained soldier. And in that moment, something inside me broke cleanly, like a bone that had been fracturing for years but finally snapped. Not because they asked, because they expected, because they weren't ashamed, because they'd strategized it, because they believed I owed them everything, even my future. My mother said softly, "Don't overthink it. Adrian, you're doing well. Your sister needs stability. Don't be selfish." There it was, the word that had been weaponized against me my entire life. Selfish. For wanting autonomy. For wanting boundaries. For wanting acknowledgement instead of extraction. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. "No," I said. My mother's smile vanished. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated. "I'm not signing anything. And if you think you're entitled to a house I pay for, you don't know me at all." Lena scoffed. "Wow. Typical." My mother's voice sharpened. After everything we've done for you. Done for me, I said quietly. Or taken from me. Silence. Heavy. Exposed. I picked up my bag, turned toward the door, and said the sentence that marked the point of no return. That house, my help, everything is off the table now. From this moment on. My mother stood up. You're being dramatic. No, I said, opening the door. I'm finally being clear. As I stepped outside into the rain, I realized something simple and devastating. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't poor communication. It was intent. They didn't accidentally undervalue me. They built a system where I didn't get to matter unless they needed something. And I had just broken it. I didn't drive straight back to Manhattan that night. I parked in an empty lot behind a closed hardware store and sat in my car with the rain hammering the roof, letting the reality settle into place. My family hadn't just crossed a line. They'd mapped the route, planned the strategy, and expected me to cooperate. For years, I kept giving because I believed they were drowning. But now I saw the truth, with brutal clarity. They weren't drowning, they were standing on my shoulders, pushing me under. Something shifted inside me that night. Not anger, not grief, precision. The same analytical instinct that had gotten me through finance exams and Manhattan deadlines clicked into place. If my family wanted to treat me like an asset, then I would act like one they no longer had access to. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started pulling records, bank statements, transfers, invoices, the utilities I'd quietly covered, the medical bills I'd paid, the repairs I'd funded, the thousands I'd sent just this once. Line after line after line, all of it tied to my accounts, not theirs. And there, like the final puzzle piece snapping into place, was the current mortgage information for the house my parents were still living in. Every major payment for the last 6 months had been processed through my bank, not as a loan, not as shared responsibility, as me keeping them afloat. Alone. My mother had conveniently avoided mentioning that part during her little family meeting. I leaned back in my chair, letting the numbers tell the story they'd been telling all along without me. The house would have slipped into foreclosure months ago. They weren't asking for help. They were dependent. Utterly. And still. They thought they could corner me into signing away control of a house I hadn't even bought yet. They didn't just expect my support, they believed they could claim ownership of it. That realization was cold, sobering, clarifying. So I did what I do best. I made a plan. The first step was cutting the financial umbilical cord quietly, clinically, with none of the emotional explanations they would twist into guilt. I drafted an email precise, professional, the kind I send to clients when it's time to close a failing account. Subject: updates to household financial arrangements. The tone was neutral, the kind of neutral that means everything. I explained that, effective immediately, I would no longer be covering mortgage payments, property insurance, utility bills, medical copays, emergency transfers, any financial support for Lena's projects, housing, or expenses, any discretionary household costs previously sent on my behalf. I wrote, going forward, all financial responsibilities connected to your household must be handled directly by you. I recommend contacting a debt counselor and restructuring your expenses. I will not be participating in further financial support. No drama. No accusations. No apology. I CC'd my father. I did not CC my sister. Before hitting send, I read the email twice. Then I added one final line. Please do not contact my workplace or attempt to involve me in financial decisions. This is final. I pressed send. It felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. A day later, I received a call from the only person who ever loved me without agenda, my grandfather's brother, Uncle Raymond. He was in his 70s, half retired, and had always been a quiet observer in the background of our family chaos. He'd heard what happened from a neighbor. "Your mother's angry," he said. "But she's angry because she's realizing you weren't the one who failed them. You were the one keeping everything from falling apart." I didn't say anything. He continued, "Your grandparents would be proud. They told me once you'd have to choose between saving your family and saving yourself, and that you'd know when the moment came." I swallowed hard. "Ray, I didn't want it to be like this." "No one does," he said gently. "But they made their choices. You're making yours. And choosing yourself isn't betrayal, it's adulthood." It was the closest thing to permission I'd ever gotten. As the days went on, something unexpected happened inside me. Peace. Not the soft kind. The grounded, unwavering kind. I stopped reacting to every call, every crisis, every manipulation. I walked through Manhattan with straighter posture. I slept through the night without my phone buzzing me awake with emergencies. I worked better. I breathed easier. I was transforming from someone who survived the chaos into someone who created boundaries so it couldn't reach him anymore. It wasn't revenge in the cinematic sense. No shouting. No dramatic scenes. It was the quiet kind, the kind where you simply remove yourself from the role they wrote for you. And that was the most destabilizing thing I could have ever done to them. They didn't know it yet. But everything was about to collapse exactly the way they feared, because for the first time in their lives, I wasn't going to stop it. I didn't plan the confrontation. If anything, I hoped my email would create distance. Maybe force my parents to accept responsibility before things spiraled. But chaos has a way of finding the people who've spent their lives avoiding accountability. And in my family, chaos always arrived wearing entitlement like perfume. It came 2 weeks later on a cold Saturday morning while I was at LaGuardia Airport, waiting to board a flight for a work conference in Denver. I was at the gate reviewing notes on my tablet when I heard my name over the intercom. "Passenger Adrian Cole. Please approach the podium." My stomach dipped. Flight delays. Maybe. Overbooking. Something minor. Instead, when I stepped forward, I found my mother, my father, and Lena standing beside the gate agent, flushed, frantic, and very much out of place. My mother's mascara had smudged from tears. Lena was pacing, furious. My dad looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. For a second, I just blinked, stunned. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My mother launched herself toward me. "How could you?" she cried loudly, drawing looks from other passengers. "How could you humiliate us like this?" Humiliate them? I hadn't even spoken yet. Lena jabbed a finger toward me. "Do you think this is funny? Mom's credit card got declined at check-in and at the kiosk. The bank said the mortgage autopay bounced this month. Did you shut it off?" My heart dropped. They were supposed to take over their own payments. That was the entire point. But their tone wasn't "we're overwhelmed." It was "how dare you stop sacrificing yourself for us." "I told you in the email," I said calmly. "I'm no longer financially supporting the household. All payments need to be handled by you." "You blindsided us," my mother wailed. "I sent a detailed email," I repeated. Lena scoffed. "Oh, please. Adrian. You know they don't understand financial jargon. Basic bill paying isn't jargon." That's when I saw him. My attorney, Brandon Hale, walking toward us with a leather briefcase and an expression that told me he'd been expecting exactly this level of drama. I'd asked him to meet me before my flight for unrelated paperwork. But now his presence felt almost choreographed. He stepped beside me. "Is everything all right?" My mother spun toward him like she'd found a new target. "Are you the lawyer? Good. Maybe you can explain why my son is abandoning us. We're his parents." Brandon gave her the polite, clinical smile lawyers reserve for clients they don't represent. "I'm Mr. Cole's counsel," he said. "I'm not employed to manage your financial expectations." My mother looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Brandon opened his briefcase, pulled out a stack of neatly clipped documents, and handed them to my parents. These, he said, are the payments your son has made on your behalf over the past 4 years. Mortgages, utilities, repairs, medical expenses, transfers. You will see totals highlighted at the bottom. Lena sneered. What is this? A bill? A reality check? Brandon said, in case there is any uncertainty about who has supported whom. My father's eyes moved slowly down the pages. He sank onto a nearby seat. Oh my God, he whispered. Was it really this much? My mother grabbed the papers out of his shaking hands. This doesn't matter. Family helps family. Brandon's tone never wavered. But only one member of this family has been helping. Unilaterally. At their own expense. The gate area had gone almost silent. People pretended not to watch. But I felt the attention like heat. My mother threw the papers onto the floor. You think waving numbers around makes you right? We raised you. We deserve care. Don't parents deserve care? I took a slow breath. For years, their guilt had hooked me instantly. Now, it barely scratched me. You deserve care, I said. But care isn't submission. It isn't unlimited money. It isn't rewriting the truth, so you don't have to face your mistakes. She blinked rapidly, stunned into silence. My father looked up at me. Voice fragile. What happens now? Before I could answer, Lena stepped forward, anger crackling off her. I'll tell you what happens. You're going to fix this. You're going to reinstate the payments. Sell whatever place you're planning to buy. And help mom and dad like you promised. You're not leaving them in the dirt. I stared at her. You want me to keep paying so you never have to grow up? I replied. You want the safety without the responsibility. She opened her mouth. But I kept going. You think it's my job to clean up every mess. It's not. Then I looked at my parents, really looked at them. My dad's trembling hands. My mom's wet, furious eyes. Lena's clenched jaw. 3 people who had built a whole mythology around my obligations and their sacrifices and were now confronting evidence that the truth was the opposite. You should have asked for help respectfully, I said quietly, not demanded ownership of my life. My mother whispered, voice trembling. We're your family. And I'm your son, I said, not your foundation. Brandon touched my arm lightly, a signal we were almost out of time before boarding. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I'm not abandoning you, I said. I'm setting a boundary. A real one. I'll help you figure out a debt counselor. I'll help you transition. But I will not fund another year of denial. And I will not let you take credit for things you didn't do. My mother shook her head violently. You'll regret this, Adrian. No, I said. I'm finally living the way my grandparents wanted on my own terms. Then I said the sentence that ended the argument forever. If you ever show up at my workplace, my home, or another airport gate again with demands, I will pursue legal boundaries. This is your only warning. Lena gasped. My mother's face went blank. My father covered his mouth like he'd been punched. Brandon nodded approvingly. The gate agent called pre-boarding. I lifted my carry-on, looked at the 3 people who had shaped my entire childhood, and said, take care of yourselves. For once. Then I turned toward the jet bridge and walked away. They didn't follow. They couldn't. For the first time in my life, my freedom wasn't hypothetical. It was happening in real time. Step by step. Toward a future I finally owned. The fallout didn't explode, it unfolded quietly. Like a slow sunrise over wreckage. After the confrontation at LaGuardia, my parents finally had to confront the world without the invisible financial scaffolding I'd spent years holding in place. Within 2 months, The bank began formal foreclosure proceedings on their old house. The mortgage I'd been covering silently was now officially their burden. And the numbers didn't lie. Lena moved back in with them temporarily, then bounced between short-term rentals when she realized the situation wasn't something she could spin into a story about resilience. My mother sent long, emotional messages about feeling abandoned. My dad sent shorter ones, heavy with regret. I didn't block them, but I didn't respond either. You can't build a new life with your hands still tied to the old one. Meanwhile, I met with Uncle Raymond for lunch every Sunday. He'd bring folders, financial planners he trusted, lists of resources for aging adults, people who could help my parents transition, not for me to pay for, but for them to take responsibility for. He made sure I knew I wasn't turning my back on them. I was redirecting responsibility where it always belonged. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone in the boundary I'd set. Therapy helped too. I learned how to separate love from obligation, guilt from responsibility. I learned the difference between helping someone and enabling them. I learned that I wasn't broken for wanting fairness, I was human. Months passed. I got promoted. I moved into a better apartment. I started traveling. Not for conferences, but for my Colorado hikes, Seattle coffee shops, the solo trip to Iceland where I stood on black sand and felt the kind of quiet my childhood never had. One night, looking out over the Manhattan skyline from my balcony, I finally understood the truth my grandparents had tried to teach me. You can love your family and still walk away from their dysfunction. You can care without sacrificing. You can build a life that's yours alone. And the peace that comes from choosing yourself, it's a kind of freedom I didn't know existed. If you've ever had to break away from someone who kept asking you to shrink so they could feel bigger, just know this. You're allowed to choose a different story. And it's never too late to start writing yours.